Welcome, guys, to the last day of Nest Flight. Today is the Digital Arts and Technology panel. I am your moderator, Marcus Cisneros. I am the Digital Film and Video Instructor, Education Specialist, fancy title there at the Digital Nest. I am a editor, a cinematographer, and a post-production supervisor, and I am so excited to have our panelists here today. Real quick, just digital arts and technology is something that you don't really think about when you think about tech is the design side of stuff, is the iterative process of designing a product or a service or a piece of artwork or something like that. And I'm really, really excited to get our panelists here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's move on to the next thing. So, whoa. Right now, real quick, panelists, if you wouldn't mind, I'll go ahead and I'll stop sharing my screen. Of course, you guys can go ahead and begin talking, but I would like to collect 3 pieces of information from you guys, data, if you will. I would like to collect your guys' name and pronouns, your guys' organization, and then your position there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. And whoever would like to speak up first is more than welcome to begin.
I'll just jump in. My name is Darren Caddis, and I am the VP of Corporate Design at Poly, formerly Plantronics and Polycom. We are a $3 billion global company located right here in the heart of Santa Cruz. And Marcus, I may be leaving some things out, but you let me know if you want me to keep rambling. I'm happy to.
Oh man, that was great. That was perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for introducing yourself. We also have Lisa.
I'm Lisa Marie Grillos. Hello.
Hi.
I'm go by she, her, and I'm a senior presentation designer at ServiceNow.
Perfect.
Awesome.
And then Jasenia Francisco, my pronouns are she, her. I work for a SaaS company called Asana. We're a collaboration tool. And my role at Asana is I am the marketing operations MarTech program lead, meaning that I just manage all of our software when it comes to tech for marketing overall.
That is awesome. That is really cool, guys. Thank you so much for those introductions. And yeah, again, excited to have you guys here. It's COVID. We're all digital. We're here on Zoom. We're still here to learn, to share ideas and exchange. And isn't that what this fight is about? So the first question I have for you guys is, did you guys always know you wanted to be in tech and design? Was it always like your thing? How did you, and if it wasn't, like, how did you transition? How did you really find your groove? What was really that process like? So let's go ahead and let's start off with last person we just spoke. Yesenia, how was it for you?
Yeah, I actually didn't know I was going to go into tech. So I studied finance. I believed that I was going to go into investment banking, and I did. And so I was a financial analyst for a couple of years at a large investment bank, and found myself miserable. Which can sometimes happen. And I was really lucky in terms of the role that I took on, because what it was a hybrid role. I did some finance, and the other half of the work that I did was business analytics work. So working very closely with technology teams to build out software that supported our sales and trading platform. And so that was my first exposure to software development. And actually, I've pivoted a couple of times. So since being in finance and studying finance, I went from finance to the nonprofit space and actually did software development for the nonprofit space, and then moved into tech to support from an operations standpoint and supporting both sales, and then moved in the last year over to marketing.
That was really awesome. So it took you a couple of times, a couple of different sectors, a couple of different industries. Just real quick before I move to the panelists, what was sort of that driving force that kept you going to keep on searching, and just why is that important?
Yeah, I think kind of the core of it is I had some really core transferable skills, right? The software development was something that was super unique and I had done at a large scale enterprise, right? And then to be able to do it, I usually call it like champagne taste with a beer budget, or budget taste, a beer taste on a champagne budget. I forget the analogy, but long story
Yeah,
short,
yeah.
I had seen it from both ends, like smaller organizations, and being able to be super, super scrappy and be able to put together a technology infrastructure to support them. And then I had been at a larger corporation where I could specifically have the budget to be able to build a really sophisticated tech stack for them. And through that curiosity, it was more so like I was interested in being passionate about the work that I did, right? So going into the nonprofit space, I wanted meaning. I wanted to see the impact. I wanted to see the impact of the nonprofits. And when I went into tech, it was really because I was seeking a way to challenge myself. So I found myself in the nonprofit space doing the same things over and over again. Like there's only so many times you implement Salesforce and they're all the same, right? And so moving into tech was really more about me being able to really challenge myself and see really complex problems and being able to solve that. And so that's why I moved across a couple of times.
Only goes to show the need to challenge yourself, the need to go to different industries and carrying out those through lines, through and through, and keeping sort of true to who you are. And I find it really cool that, at some point you went to the nonprofit space because you wanted to see the direct impact that that had, and how that necessarily going into the nonprofit space really isn't much a diversion. That is a learning experience that you're constantly learning, you're constantly growing and stuff like that.
Absolutely. I think sometimes what resonates for people is the fact that, you go to school and study one thing, right? And that's the one thing that you can do in your life. And I realize that as I talk to professionals throughout my career, even when I was in college, a lot of the times where they were in their career was really unexpected. And I think that, especially when you're younger, being able to take risks and challenges when they make sense to grow and not feeling stuck. Like I'm a firm believer that like all you have to do is like believe in yourself and you can get whatever you want. And I believed in myself to get out of finance. I believed myself to challenge myself beyond implementing Salesforce over and over again. And really that core skill set really can be transferred across different industries.
Mhm.
That is awesome. That is really cool. Thank you so much for sharing. And of course, if the other panelists want to go ahead and hop in and add to something, more than welcome and encourage that. Thank you so much for sharing it tonight. Darren, let's go ahead and let's hear from you. Certainly, moving from the automotive industry over to Plantronics is almost like I'm just trying to make the
Yeah.
mental transition in my head as to what that looks
Yeah.
like.
Yeah,
But I would certainly like to hear from you. Like, again, let me go ahead and share my screen again, just in case I need to,
Yeah, I
refresh
was
it or
just
whatnot.
gonna dovetail on what Jacina was saying, and that I went to design school, and like my first day of orientation, they mentioned something like 30% of the graduates wind up working in their respective major. And I thought that just shocked me. I never would have expected that. And if you had asked me like early on in my career if I would have thought I'd ever be working in the tech industry, there's no way, it's totally inconceivable. So I'm a kind of hardcore right brain dyslexic creative kid, love to draw pictures, but did not see myself like painting watercolors and selling them to tourists, for a living. I knew I wanted a job, whatever that meant, and wound up going to design school and working, as you mentioned, Marcus, in the automotive industry and transportation, designing cars and motorcycles, Fiat, BMW, Indian, and then something happened to me along those lines, or along that path where, well, I wound up crashing a motorcycle, putting myself in a wheelchair. And one of the things that a product of that experience was I became a headset user, because I can't really go from one point in a room to another while having a conversation on a phone or otherwise without a headset. It's a truly enabling device. And then I wound up getting this call from a company at the time. We were called Plantronics, and because of my situation, I found myself by completely unexpected circumstances working in the tech industry, because I thought my particular situation, I had a perspective or an acuity to potentially to like bring something to the equation, because my kind of unique situation um, that might actually help move the culture and business forward. And that was like 16 years ago. And we keep getting deeper into it. As you probably know, we make, audio and video endpoints for communication across the board. Like I say, I never would have expected to be working in tech, but here I am. I've been doing it quite a while, and everything that Justina just said, I think is absolutely true. I never was a person that necessarily had maybe the spirit and conviction in myself that I believe she does, but I just was having fun along the whole process. Like if there's a creative problem to solve, and I can express myself from creatively or artistically along the way, I'm in. And so, like I say, I'm sort of in this position by chance, really, but kind of driven by kind of this underlying intense passion for what I do and creative expression. And technology, the tech industry just happens to be the vehicle for or maybe the paintbrush, which I'm painting with these days.
And
That's well put. I like that part.
Yeah, definitely. Lisa, let's go ahead and let's hear from you. Working as a presentation designer. I mean,
yes, I bet people didn't even know it was a thing.
Oh, yeah,
I design presentations. I love it. I started out, I actually went to San Jose State for photography, and
Spartans.
Yes. Yeah. And when I graduated, it was during the .com, right? When you could just get a job doing anything. And I started doing photography with design in school. And as Yesenia was saying, transferable knowledge, right? It's all visual. It all matches. So I really learned design on the job. I never took design class. I think I took Photoshop classes because I was a photo major, never touched Illustrator or learned about kerning or any of that till I was on the job. And from there, I went to, so that job was not in the tech industry. It was at a clothing manufacturer. After that, I got my first real .com job, and that was all graphic design. And it was a steep learning curve in that I was just immersed in digital. I was so used to working with my hands and being able to move around a studio. And here I'm like sitting at a computer and, getting used to that world. And I did straight graphic design for 10 years, print and web. I went all over the place. I was like Williams-Sonoma, West Elm. I worked in places in New York. I did some jewelry company out there. And I did not like it. It was not for me. It was like, oh my God, banner ads. Who wants to look at these? I don't even want to look at them, and I got to make them all day. And there were days that I just dreaded going to work, and it wasn't until I found presentation design, which coincidentally happened to be I was working at Zynga at the time, which is a gaming company. And they make so I don't even know what they make now. They have Words with Friends, but at the time they had Farmville was one of their big games, Mafia Wars. And it was a fun work environment, but not my style, and sometimes as you're doing design, you have to do these jobs where it's like, I wouldn't really use those colors together, but that's the corporate colors. So let's just go with it. Right. And presentation design was just part of that job because we were the brand team and we dealt with our quarterly meeting every quarter. The CEO was huge about having these huge, really big quarterly parties, and we had to make the slides that would go behind him. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. You mean I can put movement to my designs and I can like illustrate what my speaker's talking about. And ever since then, I have not looked back. I only do presentation design now for 10 years. I just started a podcast where we talk only presentation design, and I geek out on it. Like I used to think, oh, PowerPoint, like I don't want to touch that. There's slides or, pie charts, and that sounds really boring. Now it's like, I could go on for days about PowerPoint and Keynote, and just, I don't want to talk about Google Slides, but Keynote and PowerPoint, really cool.
Lisa, can I just say that what you and other designers like you do is so invaluable and has such a huge impact. I mean, I'm in a world where most people couldn't, design a slide if their life depended on it. And really, really bad kind of corporate presentations are just like agonizing to sit through.
Gouge your eyes out, right?
Oh God, it's horrible. And I mean, clip art, nightmares all day long. And but anyway, I just wanted to I just so appreciate what you guys bring to the table and wanted to share.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I was going to say ditto as someone who puts together presentations.
Yes.
Either you have someone who designs them and they look great, or there's a whole bunch of memes on them just to get the point across.
Right. Yes. Like GIFs. Yeah. It's definitely a niche. Like there's not that many people who do it. I probably know all 100 people who are presentation designers. We have a Slack group, and and we're called the slide jockeys. We talk slides all day long. But yeah, it's when I found it, I think what really drew me to it was that I could sit down with someone, my speaker, or their people, hear what they want to tell the audience, and then interpret that visually. And that's like my superpower, and it's really, it's something that it took me a while to hone that. And now I'm just like, I love doing it. So it's all about the story.
About the story, and really trying to pull that story out of people that may not be clear on what they're communicating. I'm guessing.
Yes, definitely, especially engineers.
Yeah.
Who think I know exactly what they're talking about. And I'm like, back it up. Tell me as if I'm a kindergartner,
Yeah.
So yeah, ServiceNow is based in Santa Clara, and it's a very technical, I can't even tell you all the things that they do. We are cloud-based IT, and we do a lot of like the packages with the chatbots. When you go to a website and there's a chatbot there, and you have to ask that chatbot something, they make the chatbot. They make a lot of different things on their platform that make work easier. So it's a technical thing. I've done events at Facebook for years, and those were like super fun, crazy, great food, but the same kind of like sitting down with an engineer who created this product and then telling the audience how they did that. So that's where I'm at.
That is really cool. I love hearing all you guys' stories and the backgrounds and just the moments that you guys found to either move on to the next thing or to find that little thing until you're up until now. And it sounds like, you guys have all similar moments as to when you realized what your passion was and things like that. And a lot of people feel that that's just one grandiose moment that you find it an epiphany, or you find it one day when you turn 18, when you receive that graduate diploma from high school or from college or something like that, and magically appears what you're supposed to do with the rest of your life.
If only.
Take out loans and do the rest of that kind of stuff. But what you guys all have in common is that you found your guys' passion specifically through design, through iteration, and through innovation later on. By first getting started, first getting your guys' feet wet with stuff, getting in the trenches, doing in the work, then through that found the little golden nuggets of passion that you guys gravitated towards, and through your network, through your connections, through wherever you were at, went ahead and pursued those, and ultimately leads to a much happier career from what I am seeing right now with you guys' smiles. Let me go ahead and let me bring it back to the beginning before you guys got into those companies, those positions with everything. Go ahead and start sharing my screen one more time. And that is, go ahead and present. Lisa must be like crazy, like the fact that I'm using Canva. She's like, no, it's like design everything from scratch.
Whatever makes it look good,
Next question I have for you guys is like, when you guys were starting out, how did you guys feel about the environments that you came from, either from your college, from your high school, your hometown? And how specifically did it influence your growth and your interest? And obviously, some of you guys pivoted in a certain direction, that went to a different way. How did it, the environment that you guys grew up in, how did that really sort of influence the direction you guys wanted to go in?
That's a really, really interesting question, Marcus. I grew up in the desert in Coachella Valley in Southern California, and it's interesting. You know, I like there were kind of two categories of people that lived there in those days, and it very well may be the same now, but like it was kind of the haves and the have-nots, and most of us were the have-nots, you know. But what I didn't realize that part of the world, really, it's kind of a hub for mid-century modern architecture. These old houses that, you know, kind of modern, well, it's mid-century modern architecture if you're familiar with it. But when I was a kid, those were, you know, tract homes. Those were cheap, dumpy homes that families like mine could afford to live in. And but stylistically, now those homes are highly collectible. People go and renovate them, and I mean they're kind of landmark from a design perspective, landmark. And like highly desirable, and they get a lot of attention these days. But growing up in these very simple homes sort of instilled a design aesthetic for me that I was totally unaware of. And so until later in my life, and I feel like it really kind of sent me off in a direction where I didn't really realize that until later, that what the imprint or the impact of that aspect of my life, just simply growing up in these neighborhoods, had on me. And it really defined a lot of my like personal taste and my approach to design, like sort of a minimalist contemporary approach going forward. But uh, culturally, I don't know if that area had so much of an impact on me. The power of the desert has always been really important to me. But which is a totally different conversation. But from design specifically, it was these really humble beginnings that have uh, really defined sort of the blueprint, and that have really helped kind of build my career. It's interesting. At least it's interesting to me. I'll say that. Yeah.
So it's like
It
taking a
is.
look at that, the architecture, that minimalist design. You can see it almost reflected in the products that Poly releases today, where it's, you guys talk about having your guys's, the products you guys design reflect the environment that you guys grew up in. I remember watching one of your guys' videos talking about how some of the products, I guess the surfaces of the literal materials of the products you guys design are reflective of the Santa Cruz Mountains, and then
True.
I believe your design team mountain biking and things like that, and how that
Yeah.
reflects the actual, you know, the actual product design of that. Those same design philosophies, that core ethos and stuff like that, is actually represented through your guys' work. I thought that was really cool. Thank you so much for sharing.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
it makes me think of in Mesopotamia, they were so influenced by the river and their art is so, you know, angular. And then when ancient peoples who lived by the ocean, their art is so like organic, and we're just products of that, you know.
We are products of our environment for sure. We're influenced in ways that we're not always aware of, you know. Um, yeah, it's a really good question, Marcus. Like, and it's interesting now we're having this conversation about our roles in tech. And let's face it, it's the key to success, like user interface and interaction, whatever it may be. As the transfer of information is far more successful if we can make it simple and clean and easy to understand. And luckily, I grew up in these little homes that were simple and clean and easy to understand. I mean, from an architectural and design standpoint. So, yeah, thank God for that.
I think that's
At least
something
for me.
very memorable for our members to keep in mind, is that before the digital nest ever came along, part of our core mission is to have people not be for the longest time, our community was known for agriculture and simply just that. It wasn't known for anything else. And a lot of people always wanted to, you guess, to forever leave their environment, forget it ever existed. But some of the benefits you're talking about is recognize the environment that you came from, take the inspiration from it, and that uniquely is your voice. And that is ultimately what you're saying is part of the key to success. Again, thank you for sharing. Lisa and Yesenia, how about you guys? How was your guys' environment growing up? How did you guys feel about where you guys came from, and how did it influence your guys' your career paths and your interests and decisions?
I don't know how it influenced that personally, because I grew up in Santa Clara. It was super boring. It was like, just, there was nothing happening, you know? When I went to San Jose State as a photographer, I didn't hang out with photographers. I hung out with the painters because they were cooler. And I think maybe I was influenced by, you know, what they were studying and doing. But is like going back even further, my dad is an engineer and wanted me to be an architect so bad, you know, and he was like, that's drawing, right? But it's also a lot of math. So I was like, that's not happening for me. And my older brother also went into visual arts. He's an film editor and director. And my younger brother is the engineer. So I have no idea where the split came or where I got influenced. I feel like I just paid attention to things, you know, and a lot of what I do is I notice things. I am very observant, and I think I've just always been like that. You know, I like looking at things. So, yeah.
Oh, so like your family like split down the middle. One
Yeah.
was engineering, one is like filmmaking. And you would think that, but you are so far apart. But where those really meet is that something that you actually said right now is that you're just a very close observer to the details of things. Neither both those occupations really require
That's true. Yeah.
quite an attention to detail, and that's basically what you do. Is that you take all the details, everything that these engineers are talking to you about, and you distill it to its core essence and spew it out as if you're talking to a kindergartner as its most distilled chorus form. So I do. That's awesome. That's really cool.
That
Thanks.
you just blew my mind the way you broke that down. So thank you.
Yeah.
That's awesome stuff. Yesenia, let's hear from you. Asana. I was talking about, a place where you really have to pay attention to details. I couldn't think of an environment more suiting for that than the Asana campus.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that for me, I had a completely opposite experience. I came from New York City, so I was born and raised in Manhattan. And so that always, like, a lot of people always, when I say like I grew up in Manhattan, they're like, oh, you like grew up in a high rise, like, and Manhattan is so diverse. Like Harlem is in Manhattan. Um, not in the Bronx. Sometimes people think it's in the Bronx. The Lower East Side, Manhattan. And so I grew up in Northern Manhattan. And I think that the way that my growing up really influenced me was a sense of community. Like I lived in an apartment building, not 36 floors. It was only 5 or 6 floors, I believe. There was always a sense of community, meaning like I knew my neighbors, and like to this day I go and visit my mom and they're like, I remember when you were this small. And like my neighbors know what time I like leave my mom's apartment, what like things of that nature. So it was very, very community based. I think that as I think about like growing up like in New York City, I feel super, super blessed to have lived in that city, in the sense of there's so much for you to explore. There's culture, there's science. Most people don't even know there's a medieval fort in Manhattan.
Yes, I love that place.
The cloisters. I grew up
Mhm.
near there. It's my favorite place.
Amazing.
And so I feel super grateful in the sense that it really instilled an explorer in me. Like Manhattan was my playground. I can like draw a map of all the amazing places that you could go. And so as I think about how that influenced me, it was really the explorer in me, as you can see, transitioning across industries. I think that really thinking about community and empathy was a lot of my focus. I actually didn't plan to go into finance. I had, this is going to sound super funny, but I had planned to be a forensic psychologist. I wanted to interview serial killers, which is completely different from finance, completely different from ops in terms of what I do. But I was always curious about like humans, their emotions. I was always curious about like how can we collaborate. I'm a first generation college student, and my family is on my mother's side, they're from Colombia, my father's side, Dominican Republic. And for those of you who are Hispanic, those are like polar opposites in terms of culture. And so I was always the one that kind of understood each side of the family, right? In terms of like just in terms of language, like I always joke around that like the hardest conversation is to ask for beans at our family table, because in one side it's frijoles and the other one's is habichuela, and essentially they mean the same thing, but depending on who you're eating with. So I was always at that kind of intersection where I was always trying to have empathy for another group and kind of pulling them into my world. And so a lot of the work that I do in ops is really understanding the needs of our customers, understanding the needs of our sales team, understanding the needs of our marketers. And I think through like just that experience and kind of the thread that really pulls them together. I think personally, I mean, as a first generation student, I felt behind like coming into the workforce overall. Because I mean, I'm a curly haired Latina, like how many curly haired Latinas do you see like leading a company, especially in investment banking? You
Hopefully
know,
a lot more in the future.
yes, we'll get there. But you know, even just in terms of what it meant to be professional, I think like I had to like forge my own path overall, and it was hard. I mean, I didn't know what a professional looked like me. So what I did graduating college was really take a look at diversity associations that could help me like carve that path. What does that mean? And it exposed me to role models where I was like, oh, there's Latinas, maybe not that look like me or Dominican and sassy, but but you know, they are women in leadership, leading complete, you know, divisions. And it also exposed me to leadership style, which was really interesting because I thought that there was only one way to lead, and yeah, and that really helped me as I think about like being a professional and kind of navigating my career, and then some of the kind of elements that um, that really helped me get to where I am in my career overall.
That was really cool. What I got from that is just a lot of from the two sides of things is number one, growing up in that place in New York and having your what you described as the city being your playground, the need to explore, the need to look for new things because there's so many things around you, and then having you be so community oriented, being so close to your neighbors, specifically in an environment like that. Whereas you know maybe nowadays we don't talk to our neighbors as much as we used to, or we don't know them by name or anything else like that. You, on the other hand, they knew when you left and you came home and stuff like that. And so empathy and emotional intelligence must have been a really big thing
Yeah.
growing up. And we will touch on that in a bit in a further question. But yeah, again, thank you so much for sharing. Go ahead and share the next slide. So next slide is, why is innovation in design and in tech important? And is that something that drives you? Is it something that motivates you guys? The need to improve something, the need to either improve yourself or the process or the workflow or the product or the design. Is that something that drives you, and is it important?
It's an easy yes for me, Marcus. I honestly would have to find something else to do without that sort of beacon of opportunity. Uh, you know, if we're not moving forward, if I'm not creatively challenged to reach beyond whatever we have today into something new, whether that's like a product innovation or a technology innovation, or you know, but that moves culture forward, that moves like someone's personal experience forward in some new, interesting way, I'm just frankly not interested. Like I really would have to find something else to do. But it is sort of the nature of tech, right? And it's it's almost like something that's unattainable, like to kind of reach that ideal, because the sort of the goal always moves forward. If you make incremental steps and move things forward, or advance the technology or something, there's always a next generation, or an opportunity to evolve and move beyond it. So I just think it's one of the things that's just inherently interesting and about the technology and the industries around it, because it will never be static. We'll never just I'm trying to think of other, and I don't mean to belittle like furniture or something like that, but it's a very simple thing, right? And there will always be work for designers in that context, and I love furniture, but maybe it's not as creative. Maybe the creative opportunities there, and kind of material usage and textiles and things like that. But a chair is a chair and a couch is a couch, and it's hard to like really make huge leaps there, where we see those kind of leaps and are surprised by them constantly in tech. So it's a pretty interesting place to be.
Definitely. Nothing, well, furniture doesn't have the opportunity to close gaps and make all these opportunities happen and things like that. But that's what's so exciting about it. And I think design is just ever evolving, right? If you look at the design trends of 2021, totally different from design trends of 2020 and 2019. It's just like, or it's just like this slow evolving kind of thing, like, oh, now we like this font and no shadows. And now we like 3D, and but that's what I love. I feel like I would stagnate if we were just doing the same kind of thing. And I'm the kind of person, like, I always be learning. That's my thing, right? Like I go from one thing to the next. And once I feel comfortable in that arena, I'm like, ooh, what can I get sparked with next? So I think tech and design do both of those things.
Yeah, and I think just to add to Lisa, what Lisa said, I think there's a sense of inspiration and also drive, right? Like once you start to see like just the innovation happen, whether it be in a specific product, like for us in Asana, like I get super excited when we have new celebration characters. Just something as simple as that. But they do more important stuff, like make sure that we can collaborate more effectively through automation. But I think that like the drive overall is what I get from it. Like there's a challenge in terms of in terms of innovation, in terms of like the ability to solve a problem, or the path to solving a problem, that I think is also something that resonates with me.
Marcus, I just wanted to say, so the kind of category of tech that the company I work for is focused on is really communication endpoints, right? So we make video and audio and visual communication stuff. But when you think about tech and just the way that we're connecting now, and technology makes this possible for us, right? Our ability to connect in deeper, more meaningful ways with communities we wouldn't be able to tap into otherwise. It's just astounding. I mean, I can't remember who said it, but I think it was Lisa, about like closing gaps. I mean, like the world is getting smaller, but in a really good way. We're able to communicate in ways, like I said, we never have before, and that's today. And it's hard to wrap my head around what the world's going to look like, or what technology is going to look like in 10 years. But I think that's one of the most beautiful things about it. Like, if there's a superpower here for tech, it is this. The magic is like bringing this group in particular together, or many others like it. It has the power to kind of level the playing field and create, you know, awareness and equality in ways that you know, we just haven't been able to make this kind of progress this quickly in the past, and tech's a big part of it.
Yes, I listened in on a talk at work, and there was a man, he was blind, and he was talking about this thing that he uses that makes impressions on his tongue and helps him kind of see what is happening around him. That blew my mind, you know. There was something that Facebook was doing about it was about nonverbal patients being able to type things with their brain. That's wild, you know. And it's like, if there weren't problems, then tech would have nothing to solve, right? So, and design too. So design is all about solving the problem of like, how do I tell that person this message, or how do I have the most silent headset, or, you know.
I guess yeah, where I want to take this conversation is, you guys are saying that the world is getting smaller, that design and tech is used for making those leaps forward. And obviously the big elephant in the room is that if we didn't adapt here, we wouldn't be having this conference whatsoever. We're used to having our Nest Flight conferences over, you know, day, walking all over the city, going to our different venues and gathering everybody in the big auditorium. It's a nice community event, but, you know, truth of the fact is that, like, you know, we do miss that, but ultimately we are here, and we're here because we have evolved and we have research. We put in the work to have this conference and have you guys here. And I guess what I want to ask you guys is right now is, how has your guys' inspiration, your drive changed due to the pandemic, through COVID-19, through communicating through Zoom? Do you guys miss that, you know, that environment of being inside an office and being around people? Because I think now more than ever, you know, the world is smaller, but we don't have those water cooler conversations anymore, those like peeking over the desk conversations. You don't get that human interaction. And so how has the pandemic really affected your guys's drive towards inspiration? Has it been like, I'm just gonna level it out till it gets through? It's like the year is on pause, let's not try anything new, let's not try anything innovative, let's just get through it? Or do you adapt? What is your guys' philosophy behind that?
Yeah.
That's a lot in that question. I just did a podcast on events, and, you know, from the presentation design world, I live on events. I would do 3 or 4 events a year where they're huge events, and you go to this conference center in like Orlando or Vegas or San Francisco, and tons of people, and it's like the energy, right? And I really think part of presentation design is like just being that kind of energy, being around the energy of people who are like, yes, I want to learn what you have to give me right now. And but during the pandemic, it's, you know, having it on Zoom, it's like, yeah, Zoom is amazing. Could you imagine the pandemic without Zoom? We would just yeah, what did they do 100 years ago? Made milk? I don't know, churned milk. But but I've taken it as an opportunity to grow in myself and decide, you know. So I started learning animation. I took an After Effects class, which is a whole new, just blew my mind open with like a whole new horizon of what I can do with that. And started the podcast, which is just fun to like talk with people and have that venue. And I feel like just trying to connect with people. I try to do, you know, one-on-one Zoom coffee kind of things sometimes. It's totally not the same. And I think we all know that, because when you click leave meeting, there's like that hollow, empty feeling. But there's still some level of connection, you know, like we can still have something happening. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I think, you know, just to go off of what Lisa had mentioned, like human connection is hard, like one to many, right? And even one-on-one. And I think that what I've seen at the very least is that like if you live by yourself, like I live by myself, I can only speak so much to my Google Assistant. you know, there's a need to connect that Zoom can't necessarily replace. I think Zoom can be helpful for conveying messages that we used to do in person, but like you can only really have one conversation on Zoom. I've tried having a happy hour and I was like, but I want
Yes,
to
no,
talk to you.
does not work.
And that's really tough. And I think that we all realize that we're in a tough spot where we're limited in terms of the people that we can interact with, and that we have to be innovative in terms of how we feel sane, right? How we keep mentally healthy and engaging with other people. And then also finding a way to seek community. So, like, during this time, like I know, Lisa, you had mentioned taking the class. Kudos to you. I couldn't get through a class. I tried many times to sign up for a class. But for me, I'm very much into networking. I'm like part of tons of groups and events. And I found myself like completely like sucked out of like my networking when the pandemic hit. And so where I found, and in kind of going back to innovation, like Slack has tons of communities. So I've actually like added myself to about 15 Slack communities across different groups and professionals, and have found a lot of like solace in that, like just leaning into those communities for work, for personal, and really connecting with people there. And where I need further connection, like actually setting up those coffees, or even like in my workday, like specifically like scheduling 15 minutes with individuals that I used to interact with pretty often, and just saying like no work, we only talk about fun stuff. And just making space for what makes me whole, which is that interaction, and knowing when I need it, because not everyone has time for it, but knowing when I need it and then seeking that out in an authentic way.
Nice. I started my job in April of last year, so I've never met my coworkers in person, which is a strange
It's the
thing.
weirdest experience overall.
Yeah.
I actually have like I've done some outdoor dining, and I've actually bumped into coworkers, and I can see them like, oh my God, Justenia. And like they don't know if they want to hug me, or like they're like, I don't know if I could touch you, but you are real.
I'm so glad you exist still. Yeah, I do feel, I love what you said about Slack. I use Slack a lot, and I do feel like I get more fulfillment out of connections on Slack, because I also have a few different groups there. And I think that as far as, you know, students going into the workplace or just exploring design fields, I feel like finding those groups out there and just getting into it. You know, I feel there are so many people who have been in this field like us for a while and would love to share, and ask questions, you know, and just find those people and just insert yourself. That's what I say. Be bold.
And I would also say like where there aren't those communities, starting them up, like going back to
Yes.
innovation, like Slack is readily available for anyone to start up a workspace and create the community where there isn't, because sometimes there's a niche or something that you're into that might not have that. So
Right.
creating that
That's
community.
great. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think that more than ever during the pandemic, we've learned to reflect and take a step back and see what's really important during work, and taking the time to take a step back and take care of our mental health, but also reach out there with people and interact with them. And I just can't wait for what it's like, you know, hopefully in the near future, you know, when we all get back in the offices, and we're able to see each other and have those connections and really just almost skyrocket towards, but not only productivity and innovation, but also, you know, emotional happiness, fulfillment with everybody and stuff like that. It actually goes into the next question that I have, which is, how is emotional intelligence in the workplace? How important is emotional intelligence in the workplace, and is it as important as technical intelligence? I think more than ever, you know, we're discovering, no, we're not discovering, we're just talking and having more conversations about emotional intelligence and emotional health, and soft skills as much as they are the technical skills. Obviously, the technical skills get you in the door and it is what fuels you, but the way you exist, the way you navigate within your environment has a lot to do with emotional intelligence. So that is my next question for you guys: is emotional intelligence almost as important as the technical intelligence?
I think more, frankly.
Yes, I agree.
The operative word there for me is the workplace, because it implies that there is community. It implies that there's codependency on other people and other skill sets. And if you can't navigate those waters, if you can't build relationships, if you can't work with people, if you can't empathize with them, help them see your opinions and perspectives, and have the capacity to understand and see their perspectives, you're lost. You're adrift at sea. I mean, without emotional intelligence, I think, and high like technical intelligence, then you need to be prepared to, really just kind of lead your own startup or work in isolation, which is possible, like I said, but I just can't stress enough my personal opinion of the value and importance of a high EQ.
Yeah, I think just to add what you were saying, I think more and more our workplace is becoming more and more collaborative. You have to work with others. And I think that how well you work with others is really where you can kind of pull levers with emotional intelligence. And I think the high levels or how high of emotional intelligence you have also depends on like where you are in your career path. And like especially if you as you get to a people manager, like coaching others really requires you to dive into feelings, behaviors, even sometimes the way that individuals say things. And so as you think about growing in your career, investing on how in tune you are with those skill sets and how you work with others is a great investment. I think like on the technical side, I think a lot of the technical pieces is something that you can learn, right? But the emotional intelligence takes a lot more time overall.
Yes, I definitely agree. I feel like emotional intelligence is harder to acquire as the mother of a 6 and 8-year-old who deal with this every day. But tech intelligence, especially for, I feel like probably a lot of the attendees here, maybe digital natives, and you learn tech. The thing about technology is that it has the transferable skills, right? But emotional intelligence, just being able to tell what another person is feeling and empathize with them and proceed accordingly, right? So important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that, at least for me personally, I suspect that emotional intelligence has gotten me further in my career than skill or talent.
I mean, it's so important. You're interfacing with a person, not a computer. This isn't about what you are on paper. It's about you as a person. And so, yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
I have a question in the chat if you guys have time.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I have an example of some of the ways that I've kind of used emotional intelligence and grown. Back when I was in finance, one of my core responsibilities was to reconcile monthly estimates. And I had to do that globally, meaning that I used to have to call offices in different countries to be like, hey, your estimate is wrong or it's late. And how do you build a relationship through like a cold call? Even though we worked for the same company, I was literally calling like Japan, London, and calling our New York traders and saying like, hey, you don't know me, but you owe me this. And so everyone knew when they got that random phone call from me that something was wrong. And really what I learned is that the cold calling just felt like someone was in trouble. And how do I, especially when someone is in trouble, how do I get information from them in a way that's easy and on time? Because most of the time they'd be like, oh yeah, I'll tell you the information, and then never give it to me. And my work was dependent on it. And so I found myself building relationships with each of those individuals because it would happen monthly. So I would call Japan and say, like, how's the weather over there? Tell me a little bit about your office. Like, who are you? And started to build relationships to the point that I like built a network of people that I could tap into when something was wrong. And so instead of it feeling like the Grim Reaper was calling, you know, it was like, oh, Jasenia's calling. We're going to chat a little bit and she's going to give
Nice.
me this information. And so it felt like that, to the point that like when I left that role, they're like, map out the entire network that you built of individuals. And so I think that's like a great example of like just how you use emotional intelligence. And sometimes it was like the wording that I use. Sometimes it was stopping people before they would like go all business, saying like, how's the weather over there? What did you have for lunch? You know, and before you know it, I was like a fan favorite. Like people would visit from different offices and they're like, I want to meet Jasenia in person. But I think that that is a great skill that I've kind of taken across different positions, because as I work in operations and work with technology, sometimes understanding those behaviors, understanding how to build trust and relationship pretty quickly are some of the places where I've reused those same skills. Like, let's not talk all business. I want to know your dog's name. You know, I want to know those things before we jump into this project, because that's as important as whatever the scope of the project is. And so through that, like I find it super easy to do my work because I have that personal relationship. And you know, while we might have a serious conversation, you know, and I'm telling them you didn't do what I asked you to do, at the end of the day we laugh about it because I'm like, how's, you know, Pedrito, your dog? You know, and that's how I made some of my work.
Yeah, that's real connection, you know.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I see this question in the chat of like how to build your emotional skill or your emotional intelligence. And I think it's a really, really good one. I'd be curious to hear what others have to say. Like where I went with that was, you know, at least for me personally, like a meditation or mindfulness practice just really helps me to calm myself and center myself. And I think what that does in the context of building emotional intelligence, it helps me be a better listener, a more active listener. And I think that's something that we can all remind ourselves to do, particularly in a sort of a business environment. There's a lot of people that have a lot to say, and sometimes it's hard to get a word in, but the simple act of, as Jacina was saying, like, you know, that personal touch or asking about someone's pet or family member, or but just really listening and letting people know that you're listening kind of builds trust and kind of builds your own awareness. But man, I love that question, and no one's ever asked me that, and I think it's one worth mining for all of us. Like how can we build those muscles? Because I think it has the potential to serve us all.
And I also feel like it's something that you constantly are growing. You know, it's not just you're here and you get to that point and then you're done. This is like a constant lifelong thing. I read the book Nonviolent Communication, which I really highly recommend for like everybody. That just allows you to realize that maybe the way that things are being framed, people take it in a way that is an attack, you know? And it's like, how do I frame something that isn't threatening to the person? So that my children go to a public alternative school, which is based on parenting or positive discipline, but also the other thing is it's huge on social emotional growth. And just, you know, positive discipline it helps me, studying that helps me with my partner, helps me with people I work with, because it's all about connection before correction. Just like Jasenia, what you were saying, you don't want to call the people and say, okay, you owe me money. It's like, all right, let's connect. We're people, you know? And so I think that there's just ways of finding these things.
Yeah, and I think another one to add to the list is I took a gender course in college, and one of the most interesting books that I read was, I believe her name is Deborah Tandon. It's called You Just Don't Understand, and she's someone that studies uh, language and how people use language. And so it's talking about how men and women converse. And I thought that that was super interesting, especially if you're working in tech. Sometimes I work with a room full of men. And how do you decipher what they mean, right? And how do you engage sometimes in conversation, I think is super important. So I would highly recommend that book that came out of that class. And then I wanted to go back to what you were mentioning, Darren, around listening skills. One of the benefits when I was working on the sales operations side was to actually engage in some of the sales training. So as you think about building skills on listening, there are actually some really great frameworks within like sales books and sales kind of resources around listening, like mirroring specifically is one of them.
Wow.
And as you think about practicing that skill, looking up some sales books around how to listen and how to communicate is really important.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I know. I can tell you, and I'm in a lot of meetings, and I know we've all experienced this, and I'm guilty of it myself. There are times where you tell yourself or you believe you're listening, but really what you're doing is just waiting to say something. That is not listening, right? That is not empathy. That is not being present for the other person. But coming back to like building emotional intelligence, like really being present and really being engaged in what someone else is saying is not always easy to do, quite frankly. But bringing your attention to it can really serve you in huge ways, in my opinion. So, and I'm still working on it. I am not good at it, but I'm working on it.
I feel like we're all works in progress when it comes to that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. We all make mistakes. We're human.
Mm-hmm.
And that looks like a good place to, almost like cap off that conversation. Well, again, we're all works in progress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that more than ever, I think insanely valuable. You guys are saying that is almost not a commodity in the workplace, just towards being a better human and making a better environment for you and your coworkers to be in. Not even just coworkers, just like humans. For if you are working around somebody and you are supervising somebody around people, you, I guess, better be able to put in the work yourself just to make it a nice, enjoyable experience for everybody else and to occupy their mental space, really. And when you get down to it.
Well, also companies have come along with this so that there are diversity, inclusion, and belonging teams at work, and there's it's really important to them to know how you're feeling. It's like it's very different than it used to be, like in the 50s. So,
awesome. Yeah, we what time is it right now? It is 5:30, so I believe we have room for one more question before we go ahead and move on to Q&A with the rest of the audience. And that last question is, didn't move. Lisa says cringe in her head right now. The PowerPoint. How is making connections and fostering relationships during COVID? I know we touched on it a little bit right now, but I guess we can, split it up on almost two parts. Like, how has it been during COVID, and what are you looking forward to doing in this subject matter, particularly after COVID, once the world opens back up?
I think it would be nice to meet new people in person. I think that when you're doing Zooms, it's not the same. Like, you don't get to know people the same way as in person. And so it's easier for me to connect with people who I already know over Zoom, right? Because I can my brain can fill in, oh, this is what they look like in their person right now, right? But I was joking that my coworkers that I've never met before, I don't know how tall they are. No idea. and I don't know what it would be like in a room with them, right? But as far as like true connection, I just feel like people need to get off their computers and go out in the world and meet people, because we need to stop the whole polarization and the lack of empathy that goes on.
You know, it's interesting. Like Lisa, you mentioned your what we called a pandemic hire. Like on my team, we have several people that have joined since the pandemic. They've never met anyone, but we're talking every day. And as we're sitting here, I'm realizing that these people may not know that I'm in a wheelchair.
Right.
I mean, think about that. Like, wow, that I'm trying to imagine meeting them for the first time and what that might be like. It's a completely, you know, I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think they do, but it's certainly not a topic. It's nothing we discuss. But for me personally, I just really, as I'm sure we all do, deeply miss the human interaction. I will say this, going into the pandemic and having to adjust very quickly to a different means of working, because we're very artifact based, right? We design, my team is responsible for designing hardware, and so it's very iterative, and we've got samples and models and things that we're doing all the time. And I never would have guessed we could at the the beginning. I probably wouldn't have thought we could have even survived the pandemic. Like, it would have shut us down, but we're doing incredibly well. It hasn't slowed us down that much. But it just shows the power and importance of communication and the bridges you can gap, or the gaps you can bridge, I guess, when necessary. And so we've done really, really well. I know our whole process of working, we were very much on-site team. Like, we were all in the room every day. We felt, things would fall apart if any of us were not in the room. Like, working remote, no, it's never going to work for us. And I promise you, when we're on the other side of this, many of us are going to be working from home most of the time, because it's working incredibly well, and we don't need to get in our cars and commute when we have thought that was a necessity in the past. So I happen to believe there's some silver. This has been incredibly difficult. It continues to be incredibly difficult. We've experienced losses, and I mean, make no mistake, I see this as a very tragic thing, but there are there is some gold in this, I believe, and we're gonna make lemons out of, or make lemonade out of the lemons. I'm getting all my metaphors backwards, but you guys know where I'm saying. Like, there's
Definitely.
a silver lining in here, and we're gonna make some good out of the challenges that we've been facing, through all of this. So
I think that it came. Sorry.
Oh no,
Go
go for
ahead.
it.
I think that it accelerated what would have eventually happened as far as remote work. We may have gotten to this point in 10 years or so, but being forced into it and being so resourceful as we are, it's worked for sure. I actually wanted to know, how do you share your prototypes? Do you have to do handoffs, or what does that look like?
So we have most everyone is living locally, but we're shipping in some cases, which is rare, but we make them still on site here at where the studio is, and people will drop in and out. So and everyone's very careful, and we're masked, and we social distance and things like that. But there are times we just have to be there to see models and things like that. And but we're just not all in the room at the same time, or we'll pass them around, or show up and observe them at different times, or meet in smaller groups. But that felt like something that happened all day, every day. And now in at this point of this whole experience, we realize, oh, that was really only happening a couple of times a week. We don't really need to be there 40 hours a week to keep things rolling and running efficiently. So Yeah, we're figuring it out as we go, I guess, is the short answer, Lisa.
Yeah. And I think to a certain extent, we also demystified, right? There was this like myth that the best way to work is to be in an office. And clearly, like as you talk about like being able to produce hardware, I think that's harder. Like all of my work was virtual. So when we switched to working from home, I was like, oh, I still have access to all of my work. I think the only thing that changed for us is like how we communicate and being really specific. It's one thing to say, oh, you'll find the details there and like do this work or like launch this project. And I think for us, what has changed is just how we communicate and how we guide people through things. Because if not, you're having 15 meetings about the same thing. And so I think like, as I think about how that has changed is really like being really precise about the instructions and the communication overall. But I mean, in terms of relationships for me, I just found it really hard to establish trust, right? Like it feels a little bit like dealing with like an AI, right? Or like this kind of virtual reality component, right? Like I'm Jasenia, you have never met me, but you will trust me. I am convincing you to trust me from the screen. That felt really hard to do. And it feels really hard also to be vulnerable. I think as I take a look at the past year, there has been so many things that have happened, especially with like the Black Lives Matter movement, what has been happening recently with the Asian American community, like being vulnerable or also experiencing anxiety with like the political climate, right? Do companies make space for that, right? How do you navigate all of those emotions in your day to day, sometimes in back to back meetings? So I find that like now being virtual is really hard to be vulnerable. Nobody wants to, I wouldn't say nobody wants to, it's hard to express those emotions and feel like you're being authentic, I think.
I feel safer to express it in people who I'm closer with at work. So I have one coworker who I've met in person because I brought her onto the team, and then my writer partner. But yeah, that could definitely be you. It wouldn't be a team broadcast, hey, you guys, I'm feeling like this right now. But ServiceNow is very concerned about how people are feeling. They send out survey after survey after survey of like, what are you feeling today? How's your score and all of this stuff. So I feel taken care of in that sense. But it still doesn't stop it from happening, right? My struggle is working from home with children who are distance learning in the next room. And it's really difficult, but yeah, don't want to get into that jar of worms, but
yeah,
we're for another couple hours on that.
I mean, the truth of the reality is we're in our spaces. People are curious, right? We're living our personal and professional lives at the same time. Like, how do you make empathy for that? I mean, like just as like a joking thing, like you can see my bookcase here. Like this has been like the hot topic on all of my Zoom calls. They're like, how many books are on there? How do you keep it up? And like literally I was in the middle of a meeting and like two people were like, tell me more about your bookcase. And I was like, pay attention to the presentation. So I mean, I think people are naturally curious and you're living your personal and your professional life in the same place, and creating space and empathy for that. It's not easy, especially as you mentioned, like being a mother, like people are caregivers for their parents, for others. And how do you create empathy for how they have to show up in both of those roles in a Zoom meeting?
Yep. And just trying to get it done. I do feel like I love working from home. I love being remote. And I've been, even when I worked at Facebook, I worked remotely because I just wanted to be in my own space on my own terms. So for me, it's just about getting the work done and then being able to go to the beach, or doing things on my schedule. So that helps me as a mother. So.
And Marcus, can I share one thing really quickly? It just occurred to me. So, like at the beginning of again, we make video endpoints, and at the beginning of the pandemic, we realized when we realized, wow, this is a very serious thing. We're working from home. We immediately got together, started brainstorming, very much the way we're having a conversation right now, talking about ideas of like what we could do to help people work in this condition. And and this is a prototype that I'm going to reach for, but like when we were talking, when Lisa asked, well, how are you guys getting it done? We do, we live on sketches and ideas and handing things back and forth. And so we created this little camera, which you can easily kind of grab and use as sort of a document cam. And I can show you this little sketch and like, oh, hey, hi, Marcus. And then, put it back. But that was something, that was a feature or a product or something that wouldn't have existed without the pandemic, frankly.
Cool.
And our own selfish need to communicate better as a creative team. So anyway, thought it was an interesting little anecdote, which I forgot to mention. So
Yeah.
See, that's
awesome.
Innovation, having the need for a tool. That's
necessity is the mother of invention. So, yeah.
So true.
Definitely. All right, guys. Well, it looks like it is 5:42. I know we're going to go and head off, and I think everybody's going to come back. I'm going to put us in a different room and go to the remarks, but I'm going to leave it up for the last 20 minutes for questions from the audience. And of course, we'll have a little bonus thing at the end in case, we do have time. But guys who are in the session right now, channel, the Zoom chat, if you guys have a question, go ahead and then type that into the chat, and then we will go ahead and then we will read it out. I will read it out loud to the presenters, and they'll go ahead and take your questions now. Of course, but yeah, I just in between while they're typing up their questions, just
hey, Marcus,
I'm sorry.
If they're comfortable, they feel free. They can unmute themselves and they can ask it directly as well.
All right, let's do that. It's faster. Let's go ahead. So yeah, just like Jacob said, if you guys are comfortable, go ahead and unmute yourself. We would also love to see your beautiful faces, of course, with connection right now, and see your guys' things. So if you guys want to go ahead and ask a question, go ahead, log on, or go ahead and speak up.
I have a question.
And we have a question from India.
Yeah. Hi, my name is India, and I have a question for Lisa. I feel like when I hear you talk about your role as a presentation designer, I can hear the passion like in your voice about it. And like I too enjoy designing presentations, just making things look more aesthetically pleasing, I guess I would say. So for you, what does that look like? Going from getting the initial like idea or like talking to the presenter and then going from there to actually making the presentation, and just like what does your role look like? And then also, was that role already in place, or did you kind of have to go in and then create that role yourself?
Yes, great question. So when I started, like I said, it was part of a graphic design job that I had on the brand team. But there is a growing need for presentation designers because people saw what Steve Jobs was doing, and they were like, wow, you can have these amazing slides and bring attention to your message that way. So there are definitely positions that are tailored to that. What it looks like for me is right now, so it's a little different for me right now because I have a writing partner, but I usually don't. So when I don't have a writing partner, I am interviewing the speaker, and we break it down as far as what their message is. I use something called a script doc, which is really just helps me organize my thoughts as far as it's a Word doc that just has 2 grids. And we break it down as far as like, okay, this is what we want to talk about. Here's how we're going to start talking about it. This was the problem. This is how they solved it. And once you start breaking the story down and saying, oh, wait, okay, this box actually should go up here. I'm going to move that around. Here's a supporting thing for that. And then I just start sketching. And and this is in a perfect world when I can have the time to work on something this large. Sometimes I just have to jump in and do it in PowerPoint. But I start sketching and thinking about different ways that I could show this concept, or maybe it's just a slide that has 3 things on it and I've just show those 3 things. How am I going to do it in a way that is interesting and not a bunch of words? And then it's just iteration with my client. That's my general workflow. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Very cool. If anybody else has any questions, again, as we said before, go ahead, unmute yourself, and we will take them.
I'll ask a question. Okay, so at this point in your career, like, do you ever hit, I guess this would just be for any of you who would relate to it, but do you ever have like creativity blocks when you're trying to meet a deadline? And like, how do you work through that? Do you have any techniques?
Yes, Pinterest.
I love Pinterest.
Go for a walk. There's so many things you could do just to be inspired. I find inspiration everywhere. So it might be the end credits of a movie, or I go for a walk and I like how a car looks against something. It's just, there's so many different ways. I feel like just disengaging and thinking about something else, go bake, that helps me.
Yeah, a trick for me. Yeah, the answer is yes, of course. And unfortunately, I seem to, like, my creativity kind of comes alive under stress. So I find that I put myself in situations where I am not suggesting anybody does this. I'm just sharing my experience, but I find that I put myself in a situation where I've, like, call it procrastination, but I think I feed off the pressure, and I sort of wake up creatively when I'm under pressure, and the magic seems to happen sort of in the kind of closing hours or days of a deliverable oftentimes, uh, but there are bigger questions, where, on the front side, it's not necessarily deliverable, but like, you're facing a problem like, what's the next generation of video communication? Today, we all look at this sort of Brady Bunch Hollywood Squares kind of format. Well, what does this look like in the future? Should we give people more control over the cameras and audio and video and um, um, aspects of it? Is it multiple cameras, lighting, all of these things? What does it look like? What in 10 years from now? And those are big questions. What kind of problems are we going to be solving? And hard ones to answer. And so, but a trick that I often use is just to try and change your perspective. If you feel stuck, do something to unstick yourself, like get out of that room, get out of that environment, go for a walk, do something that forces you to look at the world differently, and maybe not even the problem differently, but look at the world differently. And then you kind of build those muscles of, like, looking at problems from, I always tend to look at things like sort of a diamond, right? And every facet or plane is a different view into that same problem. And if you keep looking at it from the same window, all you're gonna see is the same. You'll see the problem from the same perspective, but looking at it from a different window and trying as many different doors or lenses or windows or whatever the metaphor is you want to use, really helps to kind of open up like creative opportunities, in my opinion. And then the other thing is, like, that I always try and do is and this is sort of a visual trick for me, but I sort of visualize the problem or the question or the world for this matter, from this, like shrinking, like I'm getting perspective on it, like going out in space, but to simplify to like almost caveman, simple, like what really is the problem? Because sometimes the problems are so complex, all we see is the detail. You got to shrink that detail down to its, this big off in the distance, and you'll see the problem completely differently and go, oh, it's not as hard as I thought, or it's not as complex as I thought. So being able to reduce it and look at it in its most simple terms, and if you're still stuck, just do something to kind of change your perspective. Like I say, get out, go for a walk, hang upside down from a tree, whatever you got to do to look at the world differently, I think is a really great, effective tool.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what both of you said, I think I'm not in the, I don't think of myself in the creative space. I'm creative with solutions. That's usually what I'm doing. But I think you get blocked because you're so inundated in kind of tunneled vision in terms of what you're doing. I think just to echo what Lisa and Darren had said, I typically like to take a walk and just have headphones and stop whatever narrative is going on so that I can restart it often is the case. And another like great thing that I do is typically journaling. So I got some advice from my manager and she was like, go take a walk and just like journal what you need. And so I literally sat in the park, no one around me, and just journaled. And sometimes that helps to just restart and give you a different perspective, and very similar to what Darren and Lisa had mentioned.
That's great. That reminds me of, there's this book called The Artist Way, and she does nature walks. She does artist dates where it's just her and she goes out and does something. And these are like recommendations that she has in the book. And one of them is morning pages, and it's just free thought journaling right when you wake up. Don't even think about anything. And I felt like I had some breakthroughs when I was doing that, which was neat. But I also feel like if it's in your day-to-day life, a lot of people go straight to computers when they're designing. And I worked with a lot of old school ad agency guys who would be like, we always start with the sketchboard, and we always just start by sketching. And that helps me change my mindset with it too, and I feel like it clicks a different part of my brain because I'm actually using my hand rather than this, typing or whatever. But I feel like that helps.
Thank you guys so much for your guys' time and being here and being present and spewing all your guys' knowledge, and it's just invaluable to us over here. So thank you guys so much for that.